Welcome, everybody, to our panel this afternoon on revenue protection. I'm joined by three distinguished panelists here. We have J.W. Linkenauger from Sinclair, Aaron Tennell from Amazon Web Services, and Kenny Elcock from New England Sports Nets.
Yes.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today. Good topic for a panel discussion here at NAB. As the use of cloud has become more and more important across the entire industry, I think this topic of how to use it for revenue protection is something that a lot of people are taking a look at. But I think the general topic of revenue protection is something that a lot of people are interested in, not only from the standpoint of revenue protection around the services that they're creating, but also how to protect the revenue associated with the advertising that goes into those services. So we're going to touch on a couple of those topics through the course of this panel. So I'm just going to start off with going down the line here and ask each of you in turn, how do you view that topic of revenue protection, and how does it fit into the business planning that you're doing?
Well, I think for us, it came as a priority / virtual edict. And when I say virtual edict, because we have two iconic franchises, our network distributes the Boston Red Sox and the Boston Bruins. And those two iconic franchises in a live event definitely has high visibility. So for us, having a revenue protection strategy was important, not just because of the live event content, but also to protect our partners. So as you had said earlier, our ad revenues. A lot of our ad revenue partners definitely, they invest heavily into those franchises.
JW, moving on to you. How does Sinclair look at this topic of revenue protection? How does it factor into business planning?
So it's real important for us in the sense that it's an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, because with the cloud services and the revenue protection, we're able to create better test environments, better disaster recovery environments, so that we are better prepared in the event that something untoward occurs during the broadcast, before or after.
Aaron, I would imagine that most of the customers that are coming to AWS have similar expectations, similar outlooks on things. But what are you hearing from those customers in terms of how they're factoring revenue protection into their ongoing plan?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a key topic for our customers. I think a lot of customers decide where they want to start their journey to the cloud. Some of them are starting with, hey, we want to protect our archives. We're going to move a copy of that into AWS. Some of them are saying like, hey, we don't have any DR strategy today, or our DR, is within the same building. How can we diversify, that play out further? And so, we're happy to help customers and partners on that journey.
Let's take a deeper dive into exactly what we mean by revenue protection. There's a couple of projects that have been done recently, and Kenny, I think the one that you guys did with NESN is probably a really good example. Can you just kind of walk folks through what that use case looks like and how you're using RPP?
I think we have a slide, and that slide shows our ability to protect our live stream using our Imagine solution from the venues to our AWS partner and back to our distributor. So our DR strategy developed not only with a parallel fiber paths, but also parallel IP paths and a combination of on-prem distribution with our Imagine Cloud solution. So we definitely took a full circle, full loop, 360 approach into protecting all various portions of our assets.
JW, you guys have a couple of projects going on as well. What can you say about the use cases that Sinclair has implemented?
Well, we've had the pleasure of doing it two different ways. One in terms of playout, and especially with our national networks platform and being able to serve that up through the cloud and get that out across the country. We also been doing it through our traffic system to be able to generate 222 logs a day through a factory process to get that out and out by 5 o'clock and off to play out in order to run it for tomorrow.
Yeah, I think those are actually both really good examples of how people are not only protecting the principal asset, which is the channel, but also making sure that you've got the appropriate revenue protection on the advertising side so that you can fully monetize that content, right?
Right.
So let's go back to the business side for a second and talk a little bit about how organizations are evaluating these kinds of options. What are you looking at in planning? What are you looking at in terms of the return on these investments? And how does your business look at the overall approach to RPP? So JW, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, for us, it was quite a process of a few months to figure out what the plan would look like. And on the surface, it looks like the question is it cost efficient? But when you factor in the personnel that it takes to run on-prem, the hardware it takes to run on-prem, we were reaching an end-of-life scenario on our hardware that was going to be a significant reinvestment. And if you amortize that over time, it just made more sense to move to a cloud, managed service environment instead. And then from the playout side, just to be able to house that and redirect it to any playout facility that could pick that process up and kick it off to the endpoints. Both of those, that provide such a strong flexibility that it made sense.
Yeah, so flexibility is key. Modernization sounds like it's key. And certainly that aspect.
Manpower savings.
Oh, yeah, that's another good one.
Yeah.
Kenny, kind of the same question to you. How does your organization think about that?
We agree exactly with what he's just said. But the other facet of it is we looked at it in a new revenue capability. The need to regenerate or create a channel to get a channel to air as soon as possible. Having a virtualized cloud solution showed definitely some immediate beneficial needs for us going forward. So for us, it was a success that we were able to meet our DR strategy. We also had revenue protection. But then when we look at growing the market, growing the industry, we now have this other superpower in the box, whereas we could definitely launch a channel virtually because we already have that process in play.
Yeah, sure. That makes a lot of sense. And I'll add that disaster recovery to the list of things that JW said. That's definitely really important. And that flexibility that you're bringing in. Now, Aaron, you guys obviously aren't operating channels. You're not using these kind of capabilities to back up your own business. But I bet a lot of your customers are.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that what we're looking to do is help customers on kind of that end-to-end journey around resiliency in the cloud. I mentioned archives earlier, like you want to protect that asset, especially if it's the only copy you have or it's that gold asset. But then as you go through that playout chain, obviously, most customers are kind of in that N+1 redundancy. We can help get better redundancy than most customers are going to be able to achieve on-prem by, having playout for multiple different regions. And then finally, even diversity of path, a lot of folks still using satellite, but, I think IP distribution's coming online, and we can give you several different pathways, to kind of increase that diversity. So I think that what we're helping customers realize is, that a cloud, a well-architected cloud environment is going to allow you to be more secure than on-prem and give you also additional diversity of that playout chain that maybe you weren't able to achieve previously. So,
and how are you working with customers to have them leverage multiple regions or multiple availability zones to make sure that they're getting the level of resiliency they need?
Yeah. Obviously, we're hiring, talent from within the industry. I think that's, pretty unique to AWS is most of the folks on the team have come from within the industry. They understand the challenges of our customers from that perspective. All of our customers and partners go through, some sort of what we would call well-architected review. So if you're a partner, we look at that technology stack, make suggestions to not only improve resiliency in the cloud, but security and frugality as well. And we'll do that same journey for customers as we help them architect those solutions as well. I think we work back from the customer and decide what outcome they're looking to achieve, and then we'll figure out how to do that best, within their budget and what the requirements would be.
One of the topics that's getting a lot of attention here at NAB is cybersecurity. Aaron, I'm going to direct this question to you first. How does kind of the protection against those cyber threats factor into an architecture, and how do you guys help protect what customers are running in AWS against those kinds of attacks?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the well-architected process, is a good foundation, and both the customer and the partner that they're choosing would want to go through that from that perspective. But I think the other thing we're trying to do is, invest deeply in security subject matter expertise for the industry. I mean, every industry out there is going to be susceptible to cyber threats. Media, entertainment, and broadcast is not alone in that. And so how do we help customers, maintain that right posture, think about end-to-end security, think about encryption, both at rest and in transit of content. And so, I think what we're interested in doing is helping both, customers and their choosing technology partners along on that journey from that perspective. I think the other thing that we look to do in a lot of these cases is, and I think, JW touched on this a little bit, is, how do we reduce just the complexity of running these systems? It's very easy to make something complex. I think it's more challenging to make it simple. What I mean by that is we also push customers and partners to think about managed services in the cloud. And I say that, around, hey, you don't have to patch the OS, you don't have to patch the infrastructure. We do that on the back end, and then ideally auto scale some of those services so that you guys can focus on your core business, which is, getting video to viewers from that perspective. So,
right.
Anybody else want to chime in on cybersecurity?
I think for us, we definitely heavily rely on our AWS partners for that they are the subject matter experts. They know what is definitely required, what's needed for successful protection layers. But I also want to share something that Aaron just said about the ease of making things simple. I think that's one of the uniqueness of your solution. You were able to deploy a solution in the cloud, which made it simple. It's the same ecosystem, it's the same interface, it's the same platform that is virtual that it would be on-prem. That created some operational some cool operational flexibilities, whether it was on-prem or the virtual world. That also helped out our IT department actually, provide the policies in place, protection policies. So I think overall, some of the uniqueness that the both gentlemen shared, we encountered. And we're definitely happy with what we see right now.
Yeah, it's great to see, these things moving into those kinds of more secure environments. But, Aaron, I think you summed it up really well, that it's easy to make things complex. The real challenge is to make these things simple. So that's the quote of the panel, I think. Let's wrap up with a question, and I'm going to ask each one of you this in turn. What do you believe are the main challenges that still need to be addressed in this area? And then what trends are you expecting to see, that we'll be talking about over the course of the next year? So Kenny, let me start with you.
I think for NESN and NESN's team, like I shared earlier, that we definitely had a challenge in the culture. We were definitely afraid of the cloud solutions. We were definitely afraid to deploy a lot of our assets away from our control. But then when we deployed, when we installed it, and we saw how easy it was, and then when you add the other areas, success areas of protection, I think we gained the confidence that, hey, what else could we do? So, we are definitely, there are definitely other things that we want to focus on, the other assets protection, other revenue growth possibilities. But overall, I think that it was definitely a cultural change for us. And that is one of the things I want to highlight.
That's interesting. JW, that question about culture change, I mean, did you see the same thing at Sinclair?
Not so much, because when we moved everything to the cloud, it didn't change the way they do their job. In fact, a lot of our users didn't even know there was a difference. They went home one day operating on-prem. They came back Monday operating in the cloud, and
Right.
the system still works the same.
So making it seamless.
Right.
Yeah. So then what do you think is the biggest challenge? What are you guys still trying to tackle?
Data access. When you have it on-prem, you've got your own folks that can go right into the data, mine what you need. When you've got it in a cloud environment, you have to come up with other ways to get to that data, to migrate that data, to manage it, and mine it for all the other things that you're going to use it for. So that takes more consideration and planning.
Well, I think the other thing it takes is APIs. I mean, you have to have ways to get access to that data.
Right.
And, we've been doing a lot of work with the Sinclair guys on the TIP initiative. Do you see that as being kind of the direction that things to move in?
Absolutely. It's interesting when, as part of the TIP community, which is TV interface practices, standardization of APIs, it's funny, initially I would have especially the buy-side vendors say, well, our clients aren't asking for this. But our answer is, but we are. We need it just to move the data around inside our own infrastructure from one system to another. Why build a different interface for every system? Let's come up with a standardized practice of API to just move the data. And we have many uses inside our own organization across multiple vendors. So if we could fit to that same structure, then life becomes a lot simpler, to the idea of removing some of the complexity of it, certainly removing some of the cost of developing something unique each vendor has.
And so then that also gives you a bit more flexibility as you move these systems up into cloud and start to take advantage of some of these revenue protection.
Exactly. And moving the data doesn't have to be proprietary, shouldn't be proprietary. It's when you put it into another system and what that system can do with the data, that's what you're buying, right? So if you can swap out one system for another because it's better at managing whatever that function is that it does, it's getting the data there shouldn't be part of that special sauce. It's what it does when it's there that makes the difference.
Aaron, I'm going to give you the last word on this one. What do you think are the challenges that still remain to be faced?
Yeah, I mean, we say at AWS that security is job zero. We try to instill that into our customers. I think that as we see right now, play out in the cloud, particularly in the Americas, is becoming a mass migration topic. It's the new normal, and I think that's good and bad. I think the good part of that is it's allowing customers to focus on not just revenue protection, but revenue expansion. A lot of customers are looking to launch fast channels and things like that. But it's also bringing a much larger focus around security in terms of all aspects. I think security, I wouldn't say it was overlooked on-prem, but it wasn't, I think, foremost in a lot of folks' minds. I think in the cloud, and we've had a number of customers say this, including banking customers like Capital One, that the cloud can be more secure than on-prem, but it's our job to help our customers and our partners get there from that perspective, because there are some different things to think about there. So I think the time is right to move play out to the cloud, but I think it's a journey that we're happy to help customers educate along the way around that, and that's why we're here. So.
Well, great. Thanks, guys. I think a couple of key takeaways from today's discussion then, number one, this use of revenue protection in the cloud really is just part of an overall migration towards cloud. It's one of the use cases that these gentlemen have found to use for cloud technology, but it definitely fits into the overall theme of cloud being more flexible, being more scalable, and it sounds like even being more secure. So thank you for all that great wisdom, and I appreciate you gentlemen for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
For the opportunity.